The HOA built a road straight through my ranch, tearing down my fence and destroying the pasture where my late wife's ashes are buried. The board president just smirked, fined me $500 a day for obstruction, and told me I was powerless to stop her. She was wrong, so I put a toll gate on her brand new road, and now I charge them $100 just to pass through. But while they were fuming about the fee, they had no idea I was about to expose the illegal secret that would bring their entire corrupt little empire down. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, because you're not going to believe what happened next. And if you believe no homeowner should ever be bullied by a power-hungry HOA, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss the moment their fake kingdom comes crashing down. The sound came first, a low, gut-deep rumble that didn't belong to the dawn. I was at the kitchen sink running water for coffee, and the old pipes in the house vibrated. For a second, I thought it was a tremor, but the ground in this part of the country doesn't shake. I took my mug onto the porch and saw it. A big yellow bulldozer, maybe 100 yards out, chewing through my fence line like it was made of licorice. The steel posts bent, moaned, and then snapped back, the wire popping with a sound like a rifle shot. Behind the machine, a small crew was pulling up the ruined posts and tossing them aside. They were clearing a path, wide and ugly, straight through my south pasture. I didn't move. I just stood there, coffee growing cold in my hand, watching a stranger carve up my life. A woman in a bright pink blazer and holding a clipboard stood near the machine, pointing, directing. That had to be her. Linda DeVere, president of the shiny new subdivision that had sprung up next door, a place they called Willow Creek Estates. There were no willows and no creek, just 100 identical houses packed shoulder to shoulder. The bulldozer kept moving, its blade dropping to scrape away the grass. It was heading straight for the old oak. My gut twisted into a cold, hard knot. That wasn't just a pasture, that was Mara's pasture. It was where she'd trained her horses, where the faint paths their hooves had worn were still visible if you knew where to look. We'd spent more evenings than I can count sitting under that oak tree, watching the sun go down, her head on my shoulder. When she passed, our son Ethan and I had spread her ashes right there, at the base of the trunk. It was her ground, her final resting place. The bulldozer didn't slow down. I heard the sickening crack of old wood as the blade slammed into the trunk. The whole tree shuddered, leaves raining down. They weren't going around it. They were going through it. I put my mug down, walked back inside, and grabbed the keys to my old Ford. My first thought wasn't anger. It was engineering. There had to be a mistake, a survey error, a clerical mix-up. This was something that could be fixed man to man with maps and deeds and common sense. The HOA office was in a little retail strip next to a nail salon. It smelled like disinfectant and fake authority. Linda DeVere was sitting behind a big desk, looking pleased with herself. She was one of those people who used her smile like a weapon. "Mr. McCreary," she said, not bothering to stand. "I was wondering when you'd stop by." I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I unrolled my survey map on her desk, the one my grandfather had commissioned 60 years ago. I set the county-stamped deed next to it. "There's a mistake," I said, keeping my voice level. "Your crew is on my land. That fence line is my property line. Has been since 1958. I pointed to the parcel lines, clear as day. "There is no easement here, never has been." She didn't even glance at my documents. Instead, she pushed a glossy folder across the desk. "This is our development plan, approved by the board. We're establishing a community access road. It's for the good of the residents to give them a second exit in case of emergencies." Her voice was syrupy, rehearsed. "According to our records, the developer secured easement rights years ago. It's all perfectly legal." I stared at her. "My deed says otherwise. Your records are wrong." She just folded her hands on her desk, that smile never wavering. "Well, that's a matter for the lawyers then, isn't it? In the meantime, the work will continue. We can't delay progress for a simple boundary dispute." I drove home in a fog. The oak tree was gone. They had ripped it out of the ground, roots and all, and pushed it into a heap at the side of their new dirt path. The raw earth where it had stood looked like an open wound. The world felt quiet, empty. I knew this wasn't a mistake anymore. This was a land grab, plain and simple, dressed up in corporate language. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived. It was from a law firm in the city. Inside was a cease and desist order. It accused me of harassing the construction crew. I hadn't even spoken to them. It said my interference was a threat to public safety. And at the bottom, there was a notice of violation. They were fining me $500 a day for obstruction of a community project. I sat at my kitchen table, holding that letter, and my hands started to shake. It wasn't the money. It was the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it. They trespass on my land, destroy my wife's memorial, and then have the gall to fine me for getting in their way. The hum of their machines was constant now, a soundtrack to my rage. That evening, the phone rang. It was her. "Mr. McCreary," Linda said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I just wanted to call and personally urge you to be more cooperative. We are trying to build a community here. We have families to think about. Your unwillingness to see the bigger picture is very disappointing." I didn't say anything. I just listened to the silence on the line, the sound of my own breathing. She took my silence as an answer. "The road will be paved by Monday," she continued, her tone hardening. "Streetlights go in tomorrow. This is happening. That road will be public by next week, whether you like it or not." She hung up. I stood there, holding the dead phone, and looked out the window at the dark shape of the torn-up pasture. They thought I was some old rancher they could just roll over. They thought this was over. They had no idea it had just begun. Linda DeVere was a woman of her word. The next morning, a different crew arrived. They didn't have earth movers. They had augers and cherry pickers. By noon, 4 steel streetlights stood sentinel along their new road, right across my pasture. They weren't just ugly. They were a statement. They cast a sickly orange glow all night, erasing the stars and making my own home feel like a foreign place. 2 days after that, they installed mailboxes, a neat little row of them for houses that didn't exist yet. The final insult was the speed bumps, 3 of them, thick black asphalt humps that made it clear they considered this a permanent, regulated street. My land, my pasture. Now it had civic infrastructure. They were creating facts on the ground, daring the slow wheels of justice to ever undo them. The fine notices kept coming, 1 a day, slipped into my mailbox like a taunt. I was up to $3,000 in bogus fees for obstructing a project I never consented to. Hope was starting to feel like a fool's game. My son, Ethan, came by that weekend. He's a paramedic, a good man who spends his days patching up other people's emergencies. He took one look at my face, then at the row of streetlights glinting in the sun, and his shoulders sagged. We sat on the porch, not saying much. He'd brought a bag of groceries, the way he always did, like he was worried I'd forget to eat. "I talked to a guy at work," he said finally, staring out at the scarred land. "His brother-in-law is a real estate lawyer. He said this could take a year, maybe 2, in court, and tens of thousands of dollars we don't have." I just nodded, sipping my water. I knew where this was going. "Dad," he said, turning to look at me, his eyes full of a pain I knew all too well. "It's not worth it. This fight is going to kill you. They have more money, more lawyers, more time. Sell the place. We can find you something smaller, quieter. Somewhere they can't touch you." The words hung in the air between us. Sell. The thought was a physical blow. "This is our home, Ethan." He shook his head, frustration creeping into his voice. "It's a piece of land, Dad. It's not Mom. It's just dirt. She wouldn't want you to destroy yourself over a patch of dirt." That's where he was wrong. It wasn't just dirt. "That's your mother's ground," I said, my voice low and hard. "I'm not leaving it." He looked like I'd slapped him. We sat in silence after that. The new distance. Between us is he feeling wider than the road they'd carved through the pasture. A flicker of hope came on Tuesday. I'd called an old friend, Sam Lopez, a county surveyor I'd worked with on a few flood control projects back in my engineering days. He was a straight shooter, allergic to nonsense. He agreed to look over the deeds and plats as a favor. He called me back from his truck. "Well, Jack," he said, and I could hear him shuffling papers. "You were right. There's no easement on your parcel. Never has been. The developer of that subdivision signed a provisional right-of-way with the county that was contingent on acquiring access from all adjacent properties. They never got yours. What they're doing is 100% illegal trespass." A wave of relief washed over me so strong I had to sit down. I wasn't crazy. I was right. "But," Sam added, his voice turning grim, Ethan's friend wasn't wrong. Getting a court to issue a stop work order and then force them to remove it all. You're looking at a mountain of paperwork and a long, expensive fight. They know that. They're counting on you bleeding out before a judge ever sees the case. The relief vanished, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. He was right. They were just running out the clock. The next morning, hope died for good. I went to drive into town for supplies and found my path blocked. They'd placed a series of heavy plastic barricades across the end of my long driveway where it met the county road. A laminated sign was zip-tied to one of them. Temporary closure for public safety. HOA Road Construction Zone. They had boxed me in, trapped me. I was a prisoner on my own ranch. I just stood there, staring at the bright orange plastic, and something inside me finally snapped. All the protocols, the rules of engagement, the belief in fixing things the right way, it all evaporated. They had bulldozed my property, desecrated my wife's memory, fined me, and now caged me like an animal. They had left me no room to maneuver, no path for civilized debate. They wanted a war of attrition. Fine. That night, I sat at the kitchen table. The HOA's threatening letters spread out before me. The orange glow from their new streetlights filled the room. I felt cornered, beaten. But then, an old feeling started to surface. It was a feeling from my army days, from long nights spent staring at blueprints in dusty tents, trying to solve an impossible logistics problem. The enemy controls the main road. You don't fight them for the road. You make the road irrelevant, or you make it work for you. I got up, walked to the old chest in the study, and pulled out my field notebooks from my time as an engineer. They were filled with schematics, stress calculations, and designs for everything from temporary bridges to perimeter defenses. The pages were worn, the ink faded, but the logic was as clear as the day I'd written it. I turned to a fresh page in the back of one of them. I picked up a pencil, the graphite feeling, steady and familiar in my hand. If they want a road through my ranch, I whispered to the empty room, fine, but they'll pay for it. And under the dim light, I began to sketch a simple design, a heavy steel gate, a counterweight, and a mechanism for collection. A toll gate. The fight wasn't over. It had just changed. The 2 days I spent locked behind their orange plastic barricades were a gift. They thought they had me pinned down, stewing in my own helplessness. What they did was give me time to think, plan, and work without interruption. My barn is more of a workshop. It's where I keep the tools and remnants from a lifetime of fixing things, building things, and over-engineering solutions to simple problems. It's my sanctuary. I started by pulling out the old irrigation pipes I'd replaced a few years back. They were 3-inch diameter, thick-walled steel, rusted on the outside, but structurally sound. An hour with a wire wheel on the angle grinder, and they looked good as new. I cut 2 10-foot lengths for the upright posts and a 24-foot section for the barrier arm itself. The cutting and welding took the better part of a day. The smell of ozone and hot metal filled the air, a smell I've always found comforting. It's the smell of creation. I built a simple pivot hinge out of a truck axle bearing I had saved, knowing it would be useful someday. Everything had to be heavy-duty, industrial grade. I knew they'd try to ram it or tear it down. This gate couldn't just be a suggestion. It had to be a fact made of steel. While the welds cooled, I worked on the payment system. I wasn't going to stand out there all day collecting cash like a parking attendant. The solution was sitting under a dusty tarp in the corner, an old livestock scale, the kind with a big sensitive pressure plate. It was designed to weigh a nervous calf, so it was more than capable of detecting a $20 bill. I rigged it inside a weatherproof box with a simple slot. I then connected the scale's internal switch to a set of motion sensors and a salvage garage door opener motor. The logic was simple. A car trips the first sensor, which activates a small light on the collection box. The driver deposits the toll. The weight of the money on the scale closes the circuit, which signals the motor to lift the gate arm. After the car passes the second sensor, the motor lowers the arm back down. It was a purely mechanical system. No computers, no software, nothing they could hack or disable easily. It was reliable, dumb, and strong. This wasn't about making money. It was about making a point, using the language of engineering and property law. They had built a road on my private property without my consent. A road is a thoroughfare for passage. Public roads require the consent of the landowner to grant a public right-of-way. I never gave that consent. Therefore, by definition, it was a private access road, and the owner of a private road can charge whatever he wants for its use. On the third morning before dawn, I moved their flimsy barricades and used my tractor's post hole digger to sink my 2 steel posts, one on each side of their new asphalt road. I set them 5 feet deep in a matrix of rebar and fast-setting concrete. By the time the sun was up, those posts were a permanent part of the landscape. An hour later, one of the HOA's enforcers showed up, a burly guy in a reflective vest who called himself their compliance officer. He saw the posts, puffed out his chest, and started scribbling on his clipboard. He marched up to my front door and taped a notice to it. Another fine, this time for unauthorized installation of fence posts. He gave me a smug little nod before driving off in his golf cart. He had no idea what he was looking at. He just saw posts. He didn't see the fulcrum of a new reality. The rest of the day was spent mounting the gate arm and wiring the control box. That evening, I drove my old Ford into town and went to a print shop. I had them make me 3 large signs on heavy aluminum using bold, official-looking letters. One read, "Private property, no trespassing." The second, "Private access road, access granted upon payment of toll." And the third, the beautiful one, "Toll, $100 per crossing, cash or card accepted. All proceeds are the property of McCreary Ranch LLC." I registered the LLC that afternoon online for $50. Everything had to be by the book, my book. I hung the signs after dark, one on each side of the gate and a warning sign 100 feet back. The next morning, I made a thermos of coffee, took a folding chair out to my porch, and waited. The neighborhood began to stir. A few joggers and dog walkers stopped, staring at the gate. I could see them pointing, talking on their phones. The whispers were starting. Half of them probably thought I was a crazy old coot. The other half, maybe, just maybe, were seeing the first spark of a rebellion. At 8:15 a.m., I saw it. A gleaming white SUV, the kind that costs more than my tractor. It turned off the main road and onto their new road, picking up speed before the driver noticed the bright yellow arm blocking her path. The SUV screeched to a halt a few feet from the gate. The tinted window slid down, and Linda DeVere glared out, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. I took a slow sip of my coffee, stood up, and walked calmly to the edge of my porch. She leaned her head out the window. "What is the meaning of this, McCreary? Open this gate immediately." I just gave her a polite nod. "That'll be $100, ma'am." Linda DeVere's face went through 3 distinct stages of emotion in about 5 seconds. Confusion, then indignation, then pure, molten fury. "You can't be serious," she sputtered, her voice an octave higher than before. "This is a community road. You will move this thing right now." I didn't move from the porch. I just held my coffee mug and let the silence do the work. A car in her own subdivision, blocked by her own progress, honked its horn. Her head snapped back. "I am the president of this HOA. I will have you fined into oblivion," she shouted, stabbing a finger in my direction. I took another slow sip. "The fine for trespassing on my private road is $100, I said, my voice carrying easily in the still morning air. "Payable now." For a moment, I thought she might actually get out of the car. Instead, she slammed her hand on the horn, a long, angry blast, then wrenched the steering wheel around. With a squeal of expensive tires on fresh asphalt, she performed a 3-point turn and sped back the way she came. The power had shifted. She knew it, and I knew it. But this was just the opening move. She didn't wait long to escalate. 2 hours later, a white pickup truck with the county seal on the door pulled up to the gate. A man in a crisp uniform got out, a clipboard in his hand. Linda's SUV was right behind him, and she got out too, wearing a triumphant smirk. This was her ace in the hole, the bureaucracy, the official channels she was so certain she controlled. The code enforcement officer, a tired-looking man named Dave, walked up to the gate, studied my signs, and then looked over at me on the porch. Linda was right at his elbow, talking a mile a minute. A clear violation of residential zoning, an unpermitted structure, a public nuisance, and its impeding access for emergency vehicles. She had her script all ready. I walked down the steps and met the officer at the edge of my property. "Morning," I said, giving him a nod. He nodded back. "Sir, I've got a complaint about an unpermitted barrier here. You can't just block a public right-of-way. This was the moment, the one I had prepared for. I agree, I said calmly. You can't. Good thing this isn't a public right-of-way. I held out a thin file folder. I went down to the county records office 3 days ago, the morning they blocked my driveway. I filed a reclassification for this specific strip of my property, parcel 7B. It's no longer zoned as residential agricultural land. It is now officially designated as agricultural commercial access. It's a private commercial road, owned and operated by a registered LLC. As such, it falls outside the jurisdiction of a residential homeowners association. I tapped the top sheet of paper, a form with a heavy blue ink stamp from the county clerk. HOA bylaws don't apply to commercial property, and I am under no obligation to provide free access. The officer took the folder. He was silent for a full minute as he read, his eyes scanning the official language, the parcel ID numbers, and the freshly dated seal. Linda's smug expression began to melt. That's not possible, she stammered. He can't just do that. The officer looked up, first at her, then at me. He handed the folder back. Ma'am, according to this stamped and filed document, he can. This is a private road. It's a civil matter between you and him. It's not a code violation. Linda's face turned a shade of purple I had only ever seen in a sunset. She lost control. You can't do this, she shrieked, marching past the officer and planting herself on the asphalt in front of me, on my side of the gate. This is HOA property. I looked her dead in the eye. No, Linda, I said, my voice flat and cold. This is my property. You are standing on it. You built a road on it. And right now, you are trespassing on it. The sign is very clear. I pointed to the private property sign. The reversal was complete. The woman who had sent me violation notices, who had fined me daily, was now the one breaking the law. A neighbor down the road, who had been washing his car, had his phone out and was openly recording the whole exchange. The community was watching. Word spread faster than I could have imagined. That afternoon, Ethan called. He wasn't frustrated anymore. He was laughing. Dad, you're a local celebrity, he said. Somebody posted the video of Linda's meltdown online. They turned it into a meme. It's a picture of her shouting, with the caption, HOA president has to pay $100 to drive on the road she illegally built. It's everywhere. The community wasn't just whispering anymore. They were laughing at her. The HOA's next move was predictable. A letter arrived from their lawyer, threatening an immediate lawsuit to have the gate removed. It was full of bluster and legal threats. I almost felt a flicker of the old worry, but it was gone in an instant. 3 days later, another letter came, this one on plain paper. It was short and to the point. The law firm was officially withdrawing as counsel for the Willow Creek Estates HOA. Sam, my surveyor friend, called me when he heard the news through the grapevine at the courthouse. Their lawyer finally did what he should have done in the first place, Sam said. He pulled your full deed history, found out your family has had undisputed title to that land for 80 years. He told them they didn't have a case, they had a liability. He quit on the spot. Linda was now an army of one. Her lawyers were gone. The community was mocking her. She was completely, utterly boxed in. That evening, a notice was posted on every door in the subdivision. An emergency board meeting had been called for the following night at the community clubhouse. The agenda had only one item, the McCreary obstruction. Underneath, in bold letters, Linda had written a message. We will settle this in front of everyone. The clubhouse was packed, every chair was taken, and people were standing along the back and side walls. The air was thick with a mix of curiosity and tension, like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks. Linda had set this up as her stage, her arena for a public takedown. I could see at least half a dozen people holding up their phones, recording. This wasn't just a community meeting anymore, it was a public spectacle. I walked in wearing my old ranch hat and my work boots, carrying a small, heavy briefcase. I found a seat in the back row and just waited, letting the buzz of the room wash over me. I wasn't there to fight. I was there to present facts. Engineering, not emotion. Linda stood at a podium at the front, flanked by the 2 other board members who looked deeply uncomfortable. She tapped the microphone, the feedback squealing for a second. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice radiating a practiced sincerity. I know there has been a great deal of confusion regarding the new community access road. I want to reassure everyone that your board has acted in the best interest of your safety and property values." She launched into a 10-minute speech about emergency access, traffic flow, and the perils of being a single-exit community. She painted me as a selfish, uncooperative old man who was endangering the lives of children for his own personal reasons. She talked about my illegal blockade and my extortion scheme. She was playing the victim, wrapping herself in the flag of community safety. She finished with a flourish. "This behavior is unacceptable, and we will not stand for it." A scattered, uncertain applause rippled through the front rows. This was my cue. I stood up from my chair in the back. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said, my voice calm but loud enough to carry. "I believe I have a right to respond to those accusations." All heads turned to me. Linda's eyes narrowed. She had expected me to yell, to argue. She hadn't expected me to be calm. "You are not a resident, Mr. McCreary. This is a private meeting for homeowners." A man in the front row stood up. "He owns the road you're talking about. I think we should hear him out." A murmur of agreement went through the crowd. Her control was already slipping. I walked to the front of the room, set my briefcase on a table, and opened it. Inside was a small digital projector and my laptop. "You made a lot of claims about safety and community," I said, plugging the projector into a wall outlet. "But you seem to have forgotten the most important community value of all, respecting your neighbor's property." I aimed the projector at the blank wall behind her. "You claimed you have easement rights. This is a map of my property, filed with the county in 1958. An image of my deed survey plat, with its clear, sharp boundary lines, filled the wall. As you can see, there is no easement. What you built is called a road, but in the eyes of the law, what you did is called trespass." I clicked to the next slide. It was a copy of the development plan she had shown me in her office, the one with her imagined road drawn on it. Next to it, I projected the official county parcel map. They didn't line up. Her road was built on a legal fiction. You built on private land without consent, without a survey, and without a legal right-of-way. I kept my tone level, like I was explaining a simple plumbing problem, one fact after another, undeniable, documented. Her face was growing pale. The room was dead silent now. Everyone was looking at the maps on the wall, then at Linda. "And now," I said, clicking to the final slide, "let's talk about that extortion scheme." A simple, clean spreadsheet appeared on the wall. It had a date column, a vehicle count, and a daily total. At the bottom, in large, bold numbers, was the grand total. 12,300. A collective gasp went through the room. $12,000 in less than a month. "That's how much your HOA has paid to use my private road," I said, turning to face the homeowners. "I'm sure you'll all be very interested to see that on your next dues statement." Before the muttering could erupt, I held up a hand. But I didn't do this for the money. I looked directly at Linda, whose jaw was slack. "My wife, Mara, loved this community. She believed in being a good neighbor. In her memory, I am donating every single cent of that $12,300 to the county's Veterans Scholarship Fund." I paused, letting it land. "In the name of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association." For a second, there was silence. Then, one person started clapping, then another. Within seconds, the entire room had erupted in applause. The homeowners weren't looking at Linda with anger anymore. It was worse. It was pity and contempt. She was sweating now, her carefully constructed authority collapsing in real time. She started to say something, stammering about unauthorized funds, but her voice was lost in the noise. Just then, a figure stepped forward from the back of the room, a woman in a county sheriff's uniform, her expression unreadable. It was Deputy Carla Henson. She had been standing near the door the whole time, just observing. She walked calmly to the front, the applause slowly dying down as people realized who she was. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked right at Linda DeVere. "Ma'am," she said, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through the silence. "We need to talk. We have some questions for you down at the station about the unauthorized construction permits filed for this project." Being publicly humiliated and questioned by a sheriff's deputy would have been enough to make most people retreat and lick their wounds. But Linda DeVere wasn't most people. Cornered animals don't give up. They get more desperate, and Linda was now fighting for her entire identity. Her first move was predictable. She tried to rewrite history. 2 days after the disastrous meeting, a new document appeared, tacked to the community bulletin board. It was a retroactive emergency easement, a hastily drafted piece of paper granting the HOA full access to my land, supposedly signed by a previous property owner from 40 years ago. The signature was a shaky, unconvincing scrawl. It was a forgery, and a clumsy one at that. At the same time, she started a whisper campaign, feeding lies to a local online news blog known for printing sensational rumors. The story claimed I was a hostile recluse with a history of threatening neighbors, and that my toll gate was a danger to the community. It was a pathetic attempt to paint me as the villain and herself as the long-suffering public servant. She was trying to win in the court of public opinion what she had already lost in the court of public record. Her desperation gave me an opening. I wasn't going to fight her rumors with more rumors. I would fight her lies with simple, verifiable truth. I called the main local news station, the one with the respected investigative reporter, and invited them out to the ranch. I told them I wanted to give them a walkthrough and show them exactly how any citizen could verify their own property lines. I wasn't just clearing my name, I was giving every homeowner in the county a toolkit to defend themselves against someone like Linda. The reporter, a sharp woman named Maria Sanchez, arrived with a cameraman. I didn't give them a speech, I gave them a demonstration. I walked them through the 3 simple steps I had taken. First, I said, laying the documents out on my kitchen table. You pull the original survey plat for your property from the county recorder's office. It's a public record. It costs about $5. This is the legal foundation of what you own. I showed them the crisp, clear lines on my grandfather's 60-year-old survey. Second, you confirm that your parcel ID number on your deed matches the one on the county tax roll. This ensures you're paying taxes on the correct piece of land, and it links your property to the official county maps, not some developer's marketing brochure. And third, I concluded, you check the permits. Any major construction, like a road, requires a permit filed with the county, and that permit must be attached to a specific existing parcel ID. I showed them the permit Linda had filed for her community access road. As you can see, she filed it under a non-existent parcel number, a complete fabrication. She built her road on an imaginary piece of land to avoid the legal requirement of getting my signature. The reporter was scribbling notes furiously. I wasn't just an angry rancher anymore. I was a credible source, a retired engineer teaching a masterclass in bureaucratic competence. The story that aired that evening was devastating for Linda. It didn't just tell my side. It showed the evidence step by step. It empowered viewers. It made me the calm, rational expert and painted Linda as either dangerously incompetent or deliberately fraudulent. Her fake narrative was completely dismantled. That should have been the end of it. It should have been her checkmate. But her pride wouldn't let her accept defeat. That night, the motion sensor I had wired to the toll gate sent an alert to my phone. I had set it up to detect movement near the gate after midnight. I pulled up the live feed from the small, hidden camera I'd installed on one of the gate posts. The image was grainy, illuminated only by the faint glow of the HOA's streetlights, but the picture was clear enough. A dark figure was at the base of the gate, wrestling with the pivot mechanism, a large crowbar in hand. It was Linda. Dressed in all black, she was frantically trying to pry the gate arm off its hinges. She was no longer a president or a community leader. She was just a common vandal, trespassing in the dead of night, trying to physically destroy the evidence of her failure. I watched for a moment, a kind of sad pity mixing with my anger. She had lost everything and was now trying to tear down the symbol of her defeat with her own 2 hands. I picked up my phone. I didn't call the HOA. I didn't go out there myself. I dialed 911. Yes, I said to the dispatcher, my voice steady. I'd like to report a trespass and vandalism in progress. As I spoke, I could see the reflection of approaching lights in the camera feed. Red and blue lights began to flash across the pasture, painting the scene in strobing colors. The sheriff was arriving. I saw Linda freeze, the crowbar still in her hand, caught in the sudden glare of the headlights. There was a click, that perfect final sound, the sound of handcuffs locking into place. The arrest wasn't the end, but it was the beginning of it. Being caught red-handed, crowbar in hand, trying to dismantle the toll gate, was the one thing Linda couldn't talk her way out of. The initial charges were for trespassing and vandalism, but it didn't stop there. Once the authorities started digging into the road project, the whole rotten structure of her little empire came tumbling down. The fake easement she'd forged was laughably easy to debunk, adding forgery to the list. Then they looked at the HOA's finances and discovered she'd used community funds to pay for the road construction, the one based on fraudulent permits. That was misuse of HOA funds, a felony. Her entire reign, built on a foundation of fake paperwork and intimidation, collapsed under the weight of actual laws. The fallout in the community was immediate and decisive. The other two board members resigned within 24 hours, claiming they had been misled by Linda. Whether that was true or not didn't matter. No one wanted to be associated with her anymore. The HOA was effectively rudderless. The county stepped in and issued a formal order. The road, the streetlights, the mailboxes, all of it had to be removed from my property. And the HOA, or what was left of it, had to pay for the removal and for the restoration of my land to its original state. They also had to pay restitution for the property damage, including the loss of the 60-year-old oak tree. Justice, it turned out, wasn't just about stopping the bad thing from happening. It was about fixing what had been broken. But something else happened, something I didn't expect. A group of homeowners from the subdivision, led by the man who had spoken up for me at the meeting, came to my door. They were apologetic, embarrassed, and angry at how their own association had been twisted into a weapon. They didn't just want to complain, they wanted to build something better. They told me they were dissolving the old HOA and forming a new voluntary community group. Its first and only founding principle was respecting property rights. They called themselves Neighbors for Property Rights. They weren't asking me to join. They were asking for my advice on how to make sure something like this could never happen again. The war was over, and now the peace was being built, not by lawyers or presidents, but by actual neighbors. A few weeks later, after the last of the asphalt had been hauled away and the streetlights were gone, Ethan came over. He brought a truck full of new fence posts and a roll of wire. We didn't talk much as we worked, just the familiar rhythm of digging post holes, tamping the earth, and stretching the wire tight. It was the same work my grandfather and my father had done on this very same fence line. We were restoring not just a boundary, but a legacy. The land was quiet again. The only sound was the thud of the post driver and the birds in the remaining trees. When we were done, the new fence stood straight and true, a clean scar on the land that would heal in time. Ethan pulled a small hand-carved wooden sign from his truck. He'd routed the letters himself. He nailed it to the new gate that crossed the restored path to the pasture. It didn't say McCreary Ranch or no trespassing. It just said Mara's Gate. Underneath, in smaller letters, were the words, "Where fairness costs a toll." We stood there for a long time, watching the sun start to set, casting long shadows across the pasture. The empty space where the old oak had been still ached, but it wasn't a raw wound anymore. It was just a space, a memory. Ethan finally broke the silence. "You know," he said, "I thought you were going to lose. I thought they were too big, too powerful. I was afraid for you." I put my arm around his shoulders. "They were just a bulldozer and a clipboard," I said. "They had power, but they didn't have a foundation. They thought they could just build whatever they wanted. Turns out the law is a lot like engineering. You have to respect the bedrock. You have to follow the lines." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A profound sense of peace settled over the land, over me. They wanted a free road through my life. But freedom, real freedom, is never free. Sometimes you have to build a gate and charge a toll just to remind people of that. And looking at that sign, at my son standing next to me on the quiet, healed land, I knew it was worth every single cent.